And the immune system is just absurdly complex. The immune system is complex because there's lots of different cells that do lots of different interesting things, and they produce lots of different chemicals. The net result is that the immune system protects us and also plays a role in removing certain kinds of wastes from our bodies. Its job is to identify those things that it needs to attack or remove, eliminate, while at the same time not attacking, removing, eliminating the healthy things that we don't want to get rid of. And a lot of the complexity that is associated with the immune system comes from maintaining that fine balance between having this thing inside of you that can be extremely deadly, but isn't, because it holds itself back. And the process of holding itself back is very complicated, and the process of therefore not holding itself back is also very complicated. The other problem is that there's a whole slew of different things that the immune system is responsible for attacking, and there is also multiple layers that the immune system employs to attack these things that are unwanted by the body, or to otherwise prevent these things from entering into the body. We have these many, many layers, and what these layers do is often sequentially serve as a way of stopping potential pathogens from attacking us, where if the first layer fails, then the second layer attacks, and if the second layer fails, then the third layer is invoked, and so on and so forth. And in fact, for something to be a pathogen, for a microorganism to be able to cause disease, it has to some degree, have built-in mechanisms that allow it to evade these various layers of immune system function. Because otherwise, they'll just be gotten rid of and they won't cause disease. They meaning the pathogens. So I've combined this chapter with just a brief look at what microorganisms are all about. Because one of the main things that the immune system does is it combats what's known as infectious disease, which are caused by microorganisms. And so to gain an appreciation of what the immune system is doing, it's important to have an appreciation of what microorganisms are. So this is my effort to show what microorganisms are. And so these are different types of organisms, and what I'm trying to do here is distinguish between big organisms and small organisms. Now, so the small organisms are called microorganisms. The big organisms don't really have a name. They're the things that aren't microorganisms. But the microbiologists decided that that was unreasonable, and so microbiologists have this tendency to describe the bigger things as macroorganisms as opposed to microorganisms. But the microorganisms are things that, when they're fully grown, fully mature, as individual organisms, you basically can't see them with the naked eye. And this leads historically to a very real distinction between microorganisms and macroorganisms. And that basically is that until the invention of magnifying devices, we didn't have a clue that microorganisms existed. And so there was everything we could see, and then there was stuff out there that we couldn't see, and as a consequence, we didn't know about. Now, to a degree, we knew about the consequences of these things because we were very aware of diseases, and we were very aware of when foods decompose, when they go bad. So we were aware of the consequences of microorganisms, and to a degree, we could see microorganisms when enough of them were pooled together. But we really weren't aware of them. And so it took the invention of lenses, essentially, glass lenses, for us to become aware of microorganisms. And then it even took, from there, a long time before we were aware that microorganisms could cause disease. But once we were aware that they could cause disease, then it was fairly rapidly, on the order of decades, that we were able to transition to being able to do something about those diseases by attacking or otherwise preventing contact with microorganisms. But at any rate, macroorganisms, so they're the plants, the animals, and the big fungi. At the dividing line between macro and microorganisms are the molds, which aren't really something you can see with your naked eye, although you can certainly see them when lots of them are gathered together growing. And those are fungi. And then there are the things that are clearly microorganisms. These are things like the bacteria. Most of the single-celled eukaryotes are microscopic. Not all of them, but most of them are. Eukaryotes would be the organisms that have cells that have nuclei. The yeasts are single-celled fungi, so they're microscopic. And then there are the viruses. The viruses don't even consist of cells. And these are all microorganisms. And it turns out that microorganisms are actually rather important. They don't just cause diseases. And in fact, we've got lots of microorganisms that are associated with our bodies. You can think of these microorganisms essentially that are associated with our bodies as essentially yet another system of our bodies. But we haven't reached the point yet where we are willing to describe our microbiomes, the microbes associated with our bodies, as a system. But it's getting there. It's getting there. But at any rate, if you took away all the microorganisms that live in association with our bodies, we would be sick. And not only would we be sick, but we would be very susceptible to infections by bad microorganisms. By and large, the microbiomes consist of organisms that aren't pathogenic to us. Life began with microorganisms and then built up in size and complexity. When we're talking about biotechnology, gene cloning, things like that, usually we're talking about something that has something to do with microorganisms. There are fermented products, a number of different kinds of foods, including yogurt, cheeses, sausage, are made with via the action of microorganisms. And also a lot of our organic solvents are produced by microorganisms, including ethanol. Most of the living things on planet Earth are microorganisms. We just don't know this because they're tiny, so they don't take up a huge volume, and we can't see them. The functioning of ecosystems is hugely dependent on microorganisms because they're the decomposers, but they also inject nitrogen into ecosystems so we can make our amino acids and nucleic acids. But our emphasis here nonetheless is on disease-causing microorganisms, the underlying basis of infectious diseases. And disease-causing microorganisms, surprisingly, only make up a very small fraction of the total number of microorganisms out there. We are surrounded by microorganisms, and very, very few of them are capable of making us sick. And in part, this is because we have immunity. And in fact, in order for a microorganism to make us sick, there has to be some potential by that microorganism to bypass some level of our immune function. Because otherwise they're just held in check or held back or never make it far enough into our tissues to cause any damage, so they can't cause disease. So only a small subset of microorganisms, in fact, are capable of causing disease. The vast majority are not. And so those microorganisms that can cause diseases we call pathogens. And a pathogen is a type of parasite. So a parasite is an organism that essentially causes some other organism harm. Usually the organism, the parasite, is doing this because it's gaining something from it, such as food or a home or what have you. And there are a lot of different types of parasites. In terms of parasites of animals, we have ectoparasites, which are arthropods, basically, insect-like things that live on the outside of our body. There are the helminths, which are parasitic worms. So if your dog has worms, we're talking about helminths. There are also parasitic protozoa, such as the malarial parasite. We have fungi, only a small subset of fungi, but fungi that are capable of causing diseases in us. And those fungal-caused diseases are called mycoses. And then there are the pathogenic bacteria, tuberculosis, Salmonella, E. coli 0157, H7. Lots of different pathogenic bacteria, but again, a very small subset of the total number of bacteria out there. And then there are viruses. Influenza is a viral disease. AIDS, HIV, viral disease. We typically like to think of all of the viruses as being pathogenic, but even that's not correct. Because there are viruses out there that we don't pay any attention to because we're not really aware of them because they don't cause disease. So it's just the viruses that are causing infections that actually do us damage that we tend to think about, that we would call parasites. But that's not an area that people have a really strong understanding of at this point in time. Viruses that don't cause disease, we just don't study these things. If we have something called an infestation, that's basically where the body is associated with some kind of excess of either these ectoparasites, parasitic worms, or with some kind of parasitic protozoa, like a malaria parasite. If we have an actual infection, these are the pathogens, and this would include the pathogenic fungi, and ringworm is an example of a fungal caused disease, and I was going to say, I'll say a jock itch is an example of a parasitic fungal disease. So there are various kinds of fungi that cause diseases. The pathogenic fungi, a whole slew of them in viral infections. These are the pathogens, but also included among the microorganisms that cause diseases are the parasitic protozoa. The helminths and the ectoparasites really aren't considered to be microorganisms. They can be small, but they're not really so small you can't see them with the naked eye. So that's the infectious disease causing agents. And a lot of what our immune systems do, though not only what our immune systems do, but a lot of what our immune systems do is prevent these pathogens from getting a foothold in our body and causing disease, or if they're already causing disease, getting rid of these things. And the basis of this interaction of the immune system with other things, including pathogens, is something that can be described as immune system recognition. And it's important to have an appreciation of what that means. The immune system consists of a whole bunch of different kinds of cells. These are the white blood cells. And these cells produce proteins. And these proteins are receptor proteins. And these proteins are capable of binding to different kinds of things. And when they bind to something, when they can actually grab onto something and hold on, that is the basis of immune system recognition. In order for the immune system to do anything, there has to be binding between immune system cells, immune system molecules, and whatever it is that the immune system is recognizing. Actual physical binding. The immune system does not see by sight, it does not hear, it does not detect temperature, although it can change the body's temperature. What it does is it binds to things. And when it binds to things, it either engulfs those things, or destroys those things, or tags those things for subsequent destruction or other kinds of manipulations. And it also produces chemical signals. And these chemical signals go on often to tell other immune system cells to also do things. So the basis of how the immune system works, what the immune system does is it's able to identify things that don't belong in your body and then get rid of them. The basis of how that works is that the immune system has to attach to these things that need to be identified and then gotten rid of. And then once attachment occurs, this causes the immune system cells to change what they're doing and to produce chemical signals, and often in some way to manipulate whatever it is that they've attached to. And you end up with an immune response. But again, the key with these immune responses is that if you have immune responses that are too easy to come about, then you end up attacking your own body tissues, and that's an autoimmune disease, and that's a bad thing. Alternatively, if the immune response is not sufficiently easy to come about, you end up having these things that are able to attack your body with impunity, and as a consequence, you end up with infectious diseases that you may not be able to get rid of.